I knew something was wrong when Emily said she felt alive, and the man who made her feel that way was my best friend. The kitchen was dark except for the light above the stove, that dull yellow bulb we always forgot to replace, the one that made everything look older than it was. Emily stood near the sink with both hands wrapped around a mug she had not touched, her wedding ring catching a thin line of light every time her fingers moved. I was still in my work shirt, sleeves rolled to my elbows, tie hanging loose, the kind of tired that settles into your bones after 10 hours of meetings and traffic outside Nashville. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Our daughter was asleep upstairs. The dishwasher was humming behind us. And somewhere in the living room the clock ticked like it was counting down to something neither of us could stop. "Say that again," I said. My voice came out calm, which surprised me. Inside, something had already gone cold. Emily looked at the floor first, then at me, and there was guilt in her face, but not the kind that comes from being caught. It was worse than that. It was the guilt of someone who had discovered something about herself and did not know how to put it back. "Ryan tested me," she said softly. "Not in the way you think. He just noticed things, asked questions, made me feel seen. And for the first time in 10 years, Jacob, I felt like a real woman again." The sentence did not explode. It sank. That is how the worst ones work. They do not hit the walls. They go straight through the ribs and sit there. I looked at her, then at the framed family photo on the counter from last 4th of July, all three of us smiling under a sky full of fireworks. In the picture, my hand was on Emily's shoulder. I remembered that day. I remembered checking work emails between burgers, taking 2 phone calls from a client, promising her I would put the phone away, and then forgetting I had promised. Small things. That is what people say when they do not want to admit small things can stack high enough to bury a marriage. Ryan Cole had been my friend since college. He had stood beside me when I married Emily. He had helped me move into this house, carried our old couch through the front door, joked that we would be the boring couple with a mortgage and matching porch chairs. He came around often enough to feel like family, but not often enough for me to notice what he saw that I did not. Emily had been quieter lately. I knew that. I told myself it was stress, motherhood, work life. I told myself every long marriage has seasons where people pass each other in hallways like co-workers on different shifts. I told myself coming home, paying bills, staying faithful, and keeping the lights on was proof enough of love. Maybe that was the comfortable lie men like me tell when effort becomes routine. "What did he do?" I asked. Emily swallowed. "He asked when the last time was that you looked at me and actually saw me." The dishwasher clicked into its rinse cycle. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked as our daughter shifted in bed. I wanted to be angry. Anger would have been easier. It would have given me somewhere to put my hands, something to say, some clean enemy to name. But Ryan was not standing in my kitchen. Emily was. And the pain in her voice was not performance. It was a receipt for years I had been too busy to audit. "And what did you tell him?" I asked. Her eyes filled, but she did not look away. I told him I could not remember. That was the first crack. Not in her. In me. Because I could have defended myself with hours worked, bills paid, birthdays funded, vacations planned, insurance handled, problems solved. I could have stacked my responsibilities on the table until they looked like love. But none of them answered the question. When was the last time I looked at my wife without rushing past her? Emily set the mug down carefully, like a loud sound might finish breaking us. "I did not want this to matter," she said. But it did. I nodded once, slow, controlled, while my thumb rubbed the pale groove where my ring pressed into my finger. Outside, a car passed our house, headlights sliding across the cabinets and disappearing. For 1 second, the kitchen flashed bright enough to show us clearly. A husband who had mistaken presence for connection, a wife who had gone looking for herself in someone else's attention, and a silence between them that had been growing for years before either one had the courage to name it. The next morning, Jacob Lawson woke before the sun, feeling the weight of Emily's words from the night before. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the living room clock. He moved through the hallway carefully, pausing to look at family photos on the wall, remembering vacations, birthdays, and quiet evenings spent together before life had grown too busy. Emily was in the kitchen, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she had not yet sipped, staring out the window at the wet pavement from a brief rain. The air smelled faintly of roasted beans and warm wood. "Jacob," she said, her voice barely above the morning silence. "I cannot stop thinking about it. What happened with Ryan? It made me realize things I had forgotten about myself." He nodded slowly, trying to keep his expression neutral, knowing that any flicker of anger or jealousy could escalate the delicate tension between them. "Emily, I want to understand, but I also need to hear it from you. Not from assumptions, not from fear," he said, taking a seat at the table with his hands folded, the morning light highlighting the lines of fatigue and determination on his face. She looked down at her mug and then back up, eyes filled with conflicted emotion. He asked questions, simple things, about me, about what I wanted, and I remembered I could feel desired and seen, not just as a wife or mother, but as myself, she admitted, her tone fragile but honest. Jacob breathed deeply, letting the words sink in, recalling the past years of routine, work commitments, and responsibilities that had built a wall between them, walls of schedules, of good intentions misplaced, of moments he had thought were enough to demonstrate love, but now understood had not been sufficient to maintain connection. The sound of their daughter shifting in the bedroom above reminded him of what mattered most, the stakes higher than his own pride. He reached across the table slightly, not touching but signaling presence, grounding both of them in shared history. "I understand that you felt unseen," he said carefully, "and I know that was my responsibility to notice, to make you feel valued every day, not just through words, but through attention and action." Emily's eyes glistened with the morning light, a mixture of relief and shame, acknowledging her own role in retreating emotionally as well. "I never meant to hurt us," she whispered, and for a moment, the kitchen, the coffee, the soft rain outside, all seemed to pause with them. Jacob's mind raced with considerations, not for retribution or accusation, but for repair, for the path forward. He considered schedules to slow down, time to reconnect, small gestures to rebuild trust, moments to simply be present. "We have to start somewhere," he said finally, voice steady. "Not blame, not excuses. Just presence, honesty, and patience." Emily nodded, a tentative smile forming, signaling the first step toward understanding, a bridge across the gap that had grown silently between them. Outside, the light strengthened, painting the counters and the floor in gentle warmth, marking a day of reflection and the beginning of deliberate reconnection, a day where conversation, acknowledgement, and careful attention would become the foundation for repairing what had been neglected, and where both Jacob and Emily began to navigate their emotions with clarity, honesty, and a shared commitment to rediscovering each other while protecting the life they had built together. By late morning, Jacob Lawson decided to take a walk around the neighborhood to clear his mind and process the conversation with Emily. The air was crisp and the streets were quiet, lined with oaks and maples that cast gentle shadows on the sidewalks. He noticed children playing in yards, dogs trotting along on leashes, and neighbors exchanging brief greetings. Emily had stayed behind, sitting near the bay window with a notebook, jotting down thoughts she barely understood herself, the pen moving in pauses that mirrored the rhythm of her heart. Jacob felt the weight of responsibility pressing on him differently now, not just as a husband, but as a partner needing to reconnect on a deeper level, aware that simple gestures and attentive listening could rebuild what had eroded over years of routine and distraction. He recalled details from their early marriage, the vacations, late-night talks, and small celebrations that had been meaningful, and realized that reconnecting would require patience, openness, and a willingness to share vulnerabilities. Meanwhile, Emily wrote about her feelings of invisibility, the subtle appreciation she had longed for, and the way Ryan's attention had reminded her of her own worth, guiding her understanding without disrupting her respect for Jacob. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old books, and the morning light accentuated the calm stillness, giving her space to think clearly. Jacob walked back slowly, noticing the garden that needed pruning and the mailbox leaning slightly to one side, ordinary signs of life continuing despite inner turmoil. He entered the kitchen, finding Emily looking out the window with a distant expression, her hands wrapped around the notebook as if it were a lifeline. He placed a cup of water on the counter for her without a word, signaling care through action. Emily smiled faintly, acknowledging the gesture, and for a brief moment, the tension eased. They sat at the table together, No words initially, just the quiet presence of each other, letting the air settle before beginning a dialogue that would shape their next steps. Jacob spoke carefully, discussing how he had failed to notice the small signs of her unhappiness and how he intended to pay attention moving forward, emphasizing actions that matched his words. Emily listened, nodding, acknowledging her own need to communicate more openly and trust in the process of rebuilding their connection. They made a tentative plan for the day, including shared tasks and small rituals to remind each other of the bond they had nurtured in the past. The morning progressed with calm conversations about everyday matters, providing a foundation to restore trust and intimacy gradually. The walk outside and the time spent observing life had given Jacob clarity, while Emily's reflections and journaling offered her a sense of agency and understanding. Together, they began to navigate the delicate process of reconciling emotions, reestablishing communication, and appreciating each other's presence in practical, meaningful ways, laying the groundwork for a stronger, more attentive relationship that could withstand distractions and temptations, and allowing both to recognize the importance of mindfulness, respect, and genuine care in sustaining the family unit. That afternoon, Jacob and Emily continued to navigate the quiet tension in their home, moving through familiar spaces with renewed awareness of each other's presence. The kitchen table now cleared of mugs and notebooks while the sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, casting soft patterns on the hardwood floor. They spoke in measured tones about household plans, weekend schedules, and simple choices that had previously gone unnoticed, such as who would pick up groceries or arrange the family room, using these mundane decisions as a foundation to rebuild connection, demonstrating that small attentions often carry the weight of emotional repair. Emily reflected on Ryan Cole's earlier role as a catalyst, recognizing that his careful questions had awakened her awareness of being valued. Yet she remained fully committed to navigating these insights within the boundaries of her marriage, balancing gratitude for the emotional clarity with a conscious decision to prioritize honesty and trust with Jacob. Jacob responded to her reflections with patience, acknowledging the ways in which he had been inattentive over the years and expressing genuine commitment to re-engage actively in the shared life of their family, reinforcing that actions would need to align with words in order to restore mutual confidence and intimacy. They walked through the living room together, noticing small repairs and adjustments that had been pending for weeks, discussing each item in turn and laughing quietly at the minor frustrations of day-to-day life. A contrast to the emotional weight of the previous evening, but a practical reinforcement of teamwork and partnership, showing how shared responsibilities can act as a bridge over emotional distance. Emily spent a few moments in the study, opening drawers and straightening books, while Jacob reviewed family calendars and financial notes. The rhythm of domestic activity serving as a backdrop to calm their anxieties and foster mutual respect, highlighting that rebuilding a marriage involves both reflection and tangible engagement in shared routines. They paused at the staircase, watching sunlight shift across the walls, and acknowledged the comfort of the ordinary, the predictable, and the reliable, recognizing that consistency and presence are as essential to emotional connection as words or gestures of affection. Later, in the late afternoon, they prepared a simple meal together, chopping vegetables and setting the table side by side, experiencing a quiet harmony in coordination and cooperation, appreciating that rebuilding trust and intimacy is often accomplished through repeated, intentional actions rather than dramatic declarations. The day ended with a moment of reflection near the window, observing their daughter playing quietly upstairs, both Jacob and Emily silently noting the importance of their renewed attention to family life, their shared efforts and willingness to be present reinforcing the lesson that emotional repair requires awareness, patience, and consistent engagement, laying a foundation for continued growth, understanding, and partnership as they navigated the delicate but essential journey of reconnecting and strengthening their marriage. That evening, Jacob and Emily prepared dinner together, moving through the kitchen with quiet coordination, chopping vegetables and arranging dishes on the counter while sharing soft laughter at minor mishaps, a rhythm that contrasted with the tense emotions of previous days, yet reinforced connection through practical teamwork. Outside, the sun lowered over the neighborhood, casting long shadows across the floor and highlighting the warmth of their home, while inside they reflected on the day's conversations and the small steps they had taken toward understanding and empathy, recognizing that rebuilding a marriage is a gradual process requiring consistent, deliberate attention to each other's needs and feelings. Emily recounted to Jacob some of her earlier reflections about Ryan's subtle guidance and how it had reminded her of her own agency and worth, noting that the experience had not been about distraction but about clarity and self-awareness, and Jacob listened attentively, acknowledging her insights while maintaining calm, supportive presence, reinforcing the idea that communication and mutual respect are vital in restoring trust. After dinner, they moved to the living room, picking up scattered books and toys together, organizing shelves and returning misplaced items. The act of tidying and sharing responsibility becoming a metaphor for the careful attention needed in their relationship, with each small effort serving as a tangible reminder of their commitment to rebuild emotional intimacy alongside the practical elements of family life. They paused to watch their daughter practice a small piano piece, smiling at her concentration, and discussed ways to support her development while ensuring that their own relationship remained centered and strong, creating a model of partnership and teamwork within the household. Jacob suggested a brief walk around the block to enjoy the cool evening air and continue informal conversation, giving both of them space to express thoughts and feelings without the pressure of formal discussion, allowing subtle cues of body language and tone to reinforce mutual understanding. As they strolled, they reflected on shared memories, acknowledging past oversights and planning small but meaningful gestures for the days ahead, reinforcing the principle that emotional repair is as much about proactive care as it is about reflection and dialogue. Returning home, they settled in with a cup of tea, sitting close but not forcing intimacy, each appreciating the presence of the other, observing how calm, attentive engagement fostered a sense of security and trust, and understanding that the rebuilding of a marital bond is achieved through patience, mindfulness, and consistent reinforcement of mutual appreciation. Finally, they created a list of joint tasks for the following week, noting responsibilities, shared projects, and personal time, demonstrating that structured collaboration can enhance relational harmony while promoting individual growth, thereby laying the foundation for a relationship in which respect, attention, and thoughtful engagement take precedence over assumptions, distractions, or overlooked feelings, and setting the stage for continued progress and deepened connection as a family unit. The next morning, Jacob and Emily woke early, the soft light filtering through sheer curtains into their bedroom, casting gentle patterns across the wooden floor. The quiet hum of the city outside provided a calming backdrop as they prepared breakfast together, moving in sync as though retraining their rhythm to include shared space and attention, noticing the small details of each other's presence that had been overlooked for years, from the tilt of a head to the expression in an eye, the subtle gestures of familiarity that form the foundation of intimacy. Emily poured coffee while Jacob set the table, exchanging soft words about the day ahead, discussing school schedules, errands, and household tasks, but beneath the surface, each word carried acknowledgement of the previous day's discoveries and the silent understanding that both were navigating new territory in their emotional connection. They spoke about Ryan Cole's influence gently, with Emily explaining how his questions had sparked self-reflection and Jacob listening with patience and curiosity, recognizing that her experience did not diminish their relationship, but instead highlighted areas where his attention had been absent, allowing them both to view the past without blame and focus on actionable steps for improvement. They moved to the living room afterward, arranging books and organizing a small stack of papers, the shared activity reinforcing cooperation and providing a tangible representation of teamwork, demonstrating that rebuilding trust involves not only conversation but also joint engagement in ordinary life. Each act of collaboration slowly reinforcing emotional bonds that had been strained by neglect and distraction. Outside, the morning sun strengthened, warming the house with soft light, and they stepped briefly onto the balcony to take in the view of their garden and the street below, noticing details previously ignored and appreciating how shared observation and discussion can nurture both presence and mindfulness. creating opportunities to connect over simple observations and reflections. Returning inside, they spent time reviewing family plans for the coming weeks, including recreational outings and school events, taking care to ensure that each decision incorporated mutual input, symbolizing their commitment to listening and adjusting to each other's needs while respecting individuality. Emily shared her thoughts on personal goals and aspirations beyond immediate family duties, and Jacob encouraged her, emphasizing that a fulfilled individual contributes to a fulfilled partnership, reinforcing the idea that marriage thrives on acknowledgement, encouragement, and attentive engagement rather than routine or assumption. They concluded the morning with a brief, quiet period, sitting together in the living room, observing their daughter playing quietly, allowing silence to act as a gentle form of communication, an affirmation of presence, understanding, and emotional alignment, reinforcing that attentive observation and patience are critical in nurturing emotional repair. Through these actions, both Jacob and Emily began to internalize the importance of consistent attention, deliberate interaction, and emotional mindfulness, laying the groundwork for strengthened connection, mutual respect, and a renewed sense of partnership, understanding that meaningful progress requires both reflection and deliberate, continuous engagement in each other's lives, and that rebuilding their relationship involves harmonizing personal awareness with shared experiences to create a resilient and caring family environment. In the late morning, Jacob and Emily settled into the living room with soft sunlight streaming through the windows, illuminating the room in a warm glow as they prepared to discuss upcoming family plans and household matters while maintaining awareness of the delicate emotional balance established over the past few days. They started with routine items such as coordinating schedules, planning meals, and reviewing errands. But beneath the surface, each conversation carried layers of acknowledgement for past misunderstandings and the subtle efforts to rebuild trust, demonstrating that attentiveness in daily life can be as meaningful as direct dialogue in reinforcing emotional bonds. Emily spoke carefully about moments she had felt overlooked in the marriage, explaining that while Ryan Cole's gentle attention had helped her recognize her own needs and feelings, her commitment to Jacob remained steadfast, emphasizing that the experience had clarified rather than threatened her devotion, and Jacob responded with calm consideration, expressing understanding and a willingness to adapt behaviors to ensure she felt valued and recognized consistently. They walked through shared chores together, organizing shelves, straightening furniture, and tidying spaces that had accumulated unnoticed clutter, each action serving as a tangible reflection of their renewed teamwork, illustrating that repairing emotional connections often relies on consistent, practical engagement in shared life tasks, with both partners participating equally to reinforce cooperation and presence. Later, they paused near the window to observe the neighborhood, noting the rhythm of daily life outside, children playing, neighbors chatting briefly, and the subtle movements of pets, using these observations as a metaphor for the patience and attention required to maintain relationships, while sharing reflections on the importance of noticing one another and validating experiences that might otherwise go unspoken. As the afternoon progressed, they reviewed educational and extracurricular plans for their daughter, discussing schedules, activities, and ways to support her development while remaining attentive to each other's contributions and emotional states, allowing practical coordination to mirror emotional mindfulness and fostering a balanced environment where all family members feel seen and appreciated. Emily took a moment to articulate personal goals and creative projects she wished to pursue alongside family responsibilities, and Jacob offered encouragement, emphasizing that individual fulfillment strengthens the partnership and contributes to the well-being of the household, reinforcing a principle of mutual support and growth. They concluded with a quiet period sitting together on the sofa, observing small household details and reflecting on accomplishments of the day, appreciating the simple harmony of shared presence and deliberate cooperation, acknowledging that repairing a marriage and reinforcing connection relies on consistent engagement, thoughtful reflection, and recognition of both practical and emotional needs, demonstrating that intimacy and trust are cultivated gradually through attentive care, shared responsibility, and mindful consideration of each other's experiences and contributions. This day exemplified a growing understanding between Jacob and Emily, highlighting that meaningful progress in their relationship arises from both conscious emotional attention and active participation in everyday life, laying a foundation for enduring trust, empathy, and partnership that will continue to evolve through shared experience and continued commitment to one another. By evening, the conversation Jacob had been avoiding finally arrived with a sound as ordinary as a phone vibrating on the coffee table. Ryan Cole's name appeared on the screen while Jacob and Emily sat in the living room, the television muted, their daughter asleep upstairs, and the house wrapped in the blue-gray quiet that comes after a long day of trying to be careful with every word. Emily saw the name first. Her shoulders tightened, not dramatically, just enough for Jacob to notice. That small movement told him more than an explanation could have. For 2 days, they had spoken around Ryan like he was weather moving offshore, visible, but not yet over the house. Now the storm was calling. Jacob picked up the phone and let it ring once more before answering. "Ryan," he said. His voice was level. Not friendly. Not hostile. Just controlled. Ryan exhaled on the other end, and for once the man who always knew what to say seemed to have misplaced his confidence. "Jacob, I think we need to talk." Emily looked down at her hands. Jacob stood and walked toward the kitchen, not to hide from her, but to keep his own feelings from filling the room too quickly. The stove lights still glowed above the range, the same dull yellow bulb from the night Emily had said the sentence that cracked their marriage open. "Then talk," Jacob said. Ryan was quiet for a few seconds. "I crossed a line." The words were simple, but they landed hard because they were true. Jacob leaned one hand on the counter and closed his eyes. There it was. Not a confession of something reckless, not a dramatic secret, but something almost worse in its ordinary shape. A boundary had been touched, maybe slowly, maybe with good intentions dressed up as insight, but touched all the same. "Why?" Jacob asked. Ryan sighed. "Because I saw she was hurting. Because I thought you were not seeing it. Because I wanted to help, and maybe because it felt good to be the person who noticed." That last part changed the air. Honesty often does. Jacob looked toward the living room. Emily sat very still on the sofa, her profile soft in the lamplight, not listening openly, but hearing enough. "You were my friend," Jacob said. "I am," Ryan answered quickly. "No," Jacob said, calm enough that the word cut clean. "A friend would have come to me before becoming a mirror my wife needed to look into." The silence that followed had weight. Ryan did not defend himself. That helped, but not enough. "You are right," he said. "I am sorry." Jacob almost laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sorry was a small cup under a leaking roof. Useful, maybe, but not a repair. "I believe you," Jacob said, "but I need distance." Ryan's breath caught softly. "From me. From both of us." For a while. Jacob turned and saw Emily watching him now, her eyes shining with something between fear and respect. This was the line that had to be drawn, not to punish Ryan, not to punish Emily, but to give the marriage a room where only two people stood inside it. "If Emily and I are going to figure out what is left here," Jacob continued, "it cannot happen with you standing in the doorway." Ryan did not argue. Maybe he understood. Maybe he finally heard the part of friendship that requires stepping back when your presence becomes part of the damage. "I will respect that," he said. And Jacob, "Yes. Do not ignore her again." The sentence should have made Jacob angry. It did not. It made him tired, because it was the kind of truth that still hurts even when spoken by someone who has lost the right to say it. "I know," Jacob said, and ended the call. He stood in the kitchen for a moment, phone in hand, listening to the refrigerator hum and the distant creak of the house settling around them. When he returned to the living room, Emily did not ask what Ryan said. She already knew enough. Jacob placed the phone face down on the coffee table and sat across from her instead of beside her, because closeness had to be earned back honestly, not performed because the room felt sad. "He is stepping back," Jacob said. Emily nodded, tears gathering without falling. "I think that is right." Jacob looked at her, really looked, not as a mother, not as a routine, not as the woman who knew where the extra batteries were and which bills came out on the 15th, but as the person he had promised to choose before the years taught him how to rush past her. "I do not want to rebuild this by pretending nothing happened," he said. "Neither do I," she whispered. "Then tomorrow we find someone to talk to. A counselor. Not because we failed, Because we stopped listening before we noticed we were failing. Emily wiped one tear from her cheek and nodded. Outside, Nashville lights glimmered through the front window, steady and distant. Inside, the room felt honest for the first time in years. Not healed, not safe yet, but honest. And sometimes honesty is the first clean board in a house that needs rebuilding. The next morning, Jacob and Emily sat in a counselor's waiting room on the south side of Nashville, not holding hands, not pretending, just sitting close enough for the space between them to feel chosen instead of accidental. The office smelled like coffee, paper, and lavender hand soap, and rain tapped gently against the window as if the city had decided to speak softly around them. Emily held a clipboard in her lap, her thumb resting on the line where it asked what brought them in today. She wrote one sentence, then paused. We stopped seeing each other. Jacob read it upside down and felt something in his chest loosen, not because the words were easy, but because they were true. Truth has a strange kindness when it finally stops hiding. Inside the counselor's office, they did not solve 10 years in 50 minutes. No one does. Emily spoke about feeling invisible beside a man who was physically present but emotionally gone too often. Jacob spoke about confusing provision with connection, about thinking bills paid and problems solved were enough proof of love. They talked about Ryan, not as a villain to blame everything on, but as a warning light that appeared because the dashboard had been flashing for years. Boundaries were named. Distance from Ryan was agreed on. Weekly counseling was scheduled. Phones would stay away during dinner. One evening a week would belong to them. Not work, not errands, not parenting logistics, just them learning how to be curious again. It sounded small, but most broken things do not begin with one dramatic collapse. They begin with small neglects. So maybe repair had to begin the same way, one small honest choice at a time. 3 months later, the house felt different, not perfect, but awake. Jacob still worked hard, but he came home with enough of himself left to notice the woman standing in front of him. Emily still had lonely days, but she spoke before silence turned into resentment. Their daughter noticed it first. One night at dinner, she looked between them and said, "You two laugh more now." Jacob and Emily glanced at each other, and the smile that passed between them was careful, grateful, and a little sad for how long it had taken. Ryan sent one message during those months, a simple apology and a promise to respect the distance. Jacob did not answer right away. When he finally did, he wrote, "I hope you grow from this too." That was all. Friendship, like marriage, does not survive on history alone. It survives on respect for the lines that keep love from becoming damage. On a quiet Friday evening, Jacob replaced the old yellow stove bulb in the kitchen. Such a small thing. $10 at the hardware store, 5 minutes on a step stool, nothing anyone would post online or brag about. But when the new light filled the room, Emily looked up from slicing apples and laughed softly. "I forgot how bright this kitchen could be," she said. Jacob climbed down and looked at her, really looked, long enough that she noticed. "So did I," he said. They did not kiss like a movie ending. They did not pretend the ache had never happened. They simply stood there in better light, two people who had almost lost each other to years of being nearby, but unavailable, finally understanding that marriage is not kept alive by loyalty alone. It needs attention. It needs boundaries. It needs the humility to admit when someone else noticed what you should have protected. So what do you think? Was Jacob right to draw a hard line with his best friend? Or should he have focused only on repairing what was missing at home? And if a moment like this happened in your own marriage, would you see it as betrayal, warning, or a painful chance to wake up? If stories like this make you think twice about love, trust, and the quiet work of keeping a family together, stay with this channel, because some lessons are easier to hear in a story than to learn after the silence has already grown too loud.